So this is Game Audio 101. I'll be your professor for the next hour. Even though this is definitely not a college course. So I'll just be going over the role of the sound designer. I'm David Yingling. I work at Insomniac Games here in Durham. I'm one of their senior sound designers there. So, what I'll be going over, just be talking about the art of sound designing, the type of software that we use, and the process of integrating the audio into the game engine. So hopefully you come out of this with a better understanding of what sound designers do, what I do on a day-to-day basis. So what I'll be going over, start off designing sounds, and then I'll go over audio middleware, go through audio implementation, and at the end I have some sound design examples to show you guys. So, designing sounds. First is the DAW. Also, you could just say DAW. We'll get into that more. So, and then finding sound sources. So, finding all the things we need to design the final sound effects for the game. The process of layering things together and creating something brand new. So the DAW, it stands for Digital Audio Workstation. And that picture there, that's my desk in my office. It's pretty much the main tool that we use for designing sounds. It can do a lot of things. It's all of these things. A multi-track editor. That's how we layer things together. So we have different tracks where we put the sound samples, and we can layer things together that way. It's a mixer. That's how each track, we can change the volume on each of it. It's an effects processor, so we can use audio effects and plugins and all these things. It's also can control software instruments. So you can see in the picture there, I have a keyboard. So I can start playing synth sounds or any other instruments on there if I want to also layer in. So this is an example of one of the softwares that we use for designing sounds. This is Pro Tools. It's pretty much an industry standard. Pretty standard in TV and film and music industry. For games, it is widely used, but I use Nuendo. It's also pretty similar. Everything there, you can see the multi-track, the mixers there with the faders, plugins, EQ, and stuff like that. Here's Apple's version, which is Logic. Similar layout. They all work pretty similar. And this is another one, Reaper. SoundForge is another software that we use, and it's we also call it a two-track editor or a wave editor. And this is what we use just to get into those little tiny details of just like a single asset at a time. And sometimes that's needed. So how do we get our source material? Field recording. That picture right there, that would be what field recording is, going out in the field and recording straight from a microphone. Foley. This is like bringing things in and recording to video. Sound libraries. These are just big sound packs that can be purchased from other companies. Synthesizers. And this is analog or digital software or hardware. It's stuff you can play. So in field recording, it's pretty much just going out in the wild and with a recording device and a microphone and recording whatever you need. For example, ambiances, guns, cars, animals if you're lucky, weather, rain, and everything outside. It's all useful stuff. And the gear is especially made for doing this, so it'd be like recording devices that can run off a battery, microphones that you can hold with your hand. And you can see in that picture that fuzzy thing. It's also known as a dead cat. It's that's used for just dampening the wind noise. So yeah. On to Foley. This is manually creating sounds like as a performance, and it usually means to picture or video. But for games, it's not always the video. Sometimes you can call it Foley just by performing the sounds and recording it without video, but then we use that and chop it up and use it in our design, but it doesn't necessarily have to be for video, but we still call it Foley. Sound libraries. These are just packs of sounds that you buy from third parties. We often snatch these up as soon as they get released. They're very useful to have. Sometimes they can be general sounds, just like, sounds of a water bottle hitting, to like specialty sounds like guns or tanks or something like that. But they're all very useful. We use them all the time. And this is all just a mix. When we are layering sounds together, we use a mix of all these different sources. Oh, there's some websites that sell like single sound effects. So like, it may be useful for some, but I've never gone through that at all. So synthesizers, it could be like this picture. It could be hardware synths like this. Also software synths that you can use within the DAW. That's usually what I usually use software synths because it's just way easier to record the performance after that, and I have my keyboard right there. I don't have to, like this one, worry about plugging in patch cables and things like that, although it's cool. I kind of wish I had one, but it's great for experimentation and tinkering and things like that. Just like turning the knobs and seeing what kind of sounds you can make and just record the performance, and then you can go back, cut out the things you like and use it in a sound later on or something like that. And of course, it's great for sci-fi sounds and sci-fi ambience and some things like that. So creating sounds. There's layering, there's modulating, which I mean like audio effects and pitch and randomization, mixing, and getting variety. So layering, as you can see, this is the DAW with multiple tracks, and it has multiple samples going on. And they're all mixed together to create a larger sound. So this is an example. I'll play for you. And I'll go through each layer here. So that's the first one. Second one. And then you put it all together. Yep. So there's different sources there. Like there's the main body sound, and there's like a mechanical sound that goes on top of that. Then there's like a tech layer, because this is, I guess, is a sci-fi gun, I guess. And then there's the tail at the end. So all those things layered together, you make one big gunshot sound. So next is modulating the sounds. You can do this on the sound as a whole, or on each layer you can have different effects going on. It just matters what kind of sound you're trying to make. So you can see all these different plugins. Those are just modulating the sound in different ways. And here, this is another example.
Damaged, overheating, core damaged, damaged, overheating, core damaged, damaged, overheating, core damaged.
So, go back. The first three, those are just a raw recording. That was my voice. Say it's like for trying to design for a robot enemy or something like that. The second one is just a pitched it way down. And then the third one uses all those little plugins there to do a harmony, and then there's a flange on there and some compression and things like that. So it just matters where you want to take things, and you have all these tools at your disposal. So it just matters what you want to make in the end. So next is mixing, and this is another part of the DAW is the faders and everything. So that's a fader for each track. So you kind of mix on what you think is most important in your sound, and it's important not to overlap frequencies and overlap sounds too much, and you'll get this really muddy sound to it. So you have to take into account and really pinpoint and get things sitting right in the mix there. And this is also an important step because you don't want audio clipping. That basically means taking the sound over the limit of what digital audio can go, and if you do go over it, then you'll get distortion, and nobody wants that. It sounds bad. Next is variety. This is important for game audio, just for sounds that repeat frequently. So I'll go back to like gunshots, SPF game, you're shooting all the time, so you want to have lots of variety, so it keeps things interesting. Some exceptions might be like UI sounds when you're going through menus and things like that. It's not really necessary to have 5 versions of except so on to audio middleware. This is also another important tool for game audio. I'll just talk about what it is real fast. And middleware is a third-party tool. It acts as a bridge between the sound center, the game engine, and hardware. And a lot of things about it are just geared for the sound designer. So when you're looking at the interface, you'll see things in decibels, you'll see faders, just like you would see in a DAW. Things like that. And what it does is it allows us to customize the behaviors of the sound before they actually get used in the game. And it allows us to do a lot, without a programmer helping us out or anything like that. We can do lots of different behaviors without programmer help on that. And this is also another important thing, is debugging profiling. So when there's too many voices in the game, or there's like 100 voices repeating for a particular sound, middleware makes it easy to figure out what's going wrong. So one example of what middleware can do, and this example right here is called WWise or Wise from Audio Kinetic. This is what we use at Insomniac. There's others out there like Fmod, and it's up to the studio to figure out what their needs are. But this is what we use. So one example, randomization. This would be going along with the creating variety. So if you have 5 versions of the same sound, and the game needs to play a different sound each time it's triggered, you can do that in the audio middleware. Here's an example of that. So it's going through variations of the same sound, but then you play it all together. To get that variety. Another example is switches, and in this case, I'm using materials as an example. So in a game, if you're walking on dirt or you're walking on metal, this can be set up in the audio middleware to change between different sounds based on what's received from the game engine. So here's an example of that playing. Starting off dirt, going to metal, grate, what's that? Metal grate. Yeah, so when the sound is triggered from the game engine, it also comes in with other information, in this case, material information. So, and then we set it up for the different sounds based on what material it is. Another example is real-time parameter controls, RTPCs for short. This would be like if something's triggered and we get data back from the game engine, but in real time, so we can have smooth transitions between things if we want. So it's just a constant value that can change, and here's the example of that. So this is like tree wind, and right now it's ramping up as rain intensity gets higher, and now it's ramping up for wind intensity, and then it goes back down. So in this example, I'm controlling the state of weather for a particular sound. So we'll have an emitter on a tree, and then the game tells us that the rain is coming in, and it will be, say, like maximum rain. So then here I set it up for it to come in at different levels of rain. So it would move up. This I'm doing just manually in the middleware. This would all be behind the scenes in the game. Same with the other examples. Music is also a thing that can be handled in the middleware. This example is beat synced music, but same with all the sound effects and everything like that. A lot of things apply to music as well. But this is a special case just for that just applies to music. So I'll show this example. This here. So here it's playing like the beginning, and the game would tell it, hey, go to the next step. And then it'll wait, depending on how you set it up, it'll come in on the next beat, or maybe the next bar, or the next cue point, so however you want to set it up. So I trigger it here. But see, there's a delay because we set it up to play like at the next beat or the next bar. And this is just a little sample of the profiling. This is the debugging feature that's in Wise. So you can see one side is just a whole list of like every event that's happening in the game. It also lists like errors or anything like that you might see. On the right side, you'll see the signal flow of all the game voices, so you can follow the signal flow and see where things are going that way. And the bottom, there's graphs for like how many voices and channels are being used and CPU usage and that sort of thing. So it's useful. As the game's playing, you can see things live like this and see what's going on as the game is playing. Very useful. So audio implementation. So this is actually taking the sound events that are created in the middleware, in this case Wise, and actually hooking them up into your game engine. So I've got a few categories of different audio implementation. First is game events, scripted events, and then animation timelines. So these pictures, this is an example of our game engine. It's Insomniac's engine. But it's not exactly the same for all game engines, but these three things are pretty similar techniques of implementing sound in your games. So game events, usually first programmers create them in code. Then usually there's an interface to connect between the sound events and the game events. And here in this example, you can see that kind of greenish color. Those are the actual game events. And then those blue squares, and right next to it, that's where I'm actually hooking up the sound events from Wise. So these game events, they can, the programmer can add all this data that goes back to the sound engine that we can use for those material types or RTPCs and other parameters too. So scripted events. This is, again, in Insomnia Extension, we use a visual scripting language. Another example would be blueprints in Unreal Engine. In this way, it's very similar. But with scripted, this can be by game designers or sound designers. I'm often scripting sounds and their behaviors in our engine. In this example down here, it's just an example of playing a dialogue event after a certain event happens in the game. So it's just a very basic example, but they can get a lot more complicated than that though. The visual scripting language, yes, it's getting more common, and it just makes things more easily accessible to more people that aren't so familiar with coding. Yep, it just gives us more options to direct the behavior of sound effects. So animation timeline. Sounds are initiated by the sound designer. You don't really need anybody else to do anything for you. You just add them to the timeline there. Yep. So really, it's just adding sound triggers on a linear timeline, aligned with animations and other movements like that. It can be really tedious. When you have a character that has like 100 walk cycles or something like that, and you have to place a trigger on each footstep, it's tedious. It's great because for in-game cinematics, it's pretty much the same process. For FMVs or something like that, it's more like designing sound for a movie. But for in-game cinematics, putting trigger points on a linear timeline is pretty similar. And game engines usually have something like this for all their animations. Right? I'll go through some examples. Okay. So I got this video last weekend when there was a storm in town. So we'll just see how it sounds. Is it raining?
Yeah.
We'll see. No, it's bacon. But then, yeah, it's a little switcheroo. But like, really, if I was designing sound for that scene, that may just be only one element. You know, there might be wind, there might be other sounds for rain on there on top of that. Like, I might just use that for the very high frequency part of it. I might put in like some mids and low rain sounds in there, thunder and things like that. But that was just bacon. That didn't go to waste either. I got put it on a sandwich. So here's another one. This is an example of using a Wacom and hooking up to send MIDI events to a plugin in the DAW I use. This plugin is it's a sampler called Contact. So you can see all those lines there. I shoved in a bunch of sound samples. They're all different sounds on there. And I can play random sounds on the keyboard, and I can use the Wacom to draw in an XY axis different parameters at the same time. So that looks like this. So that was not for nothing specific. I was just messing around. But you can use this for if you're just trying to experiment and come up with something new. Or if it was great, I've used it for a lot of sci-fi sounds. Like if you think like Transformers, like the movie where they are transforming and their arms like very detailed, and all the little spinning and ratcheting and things. So I just have it set up to play random samples, so I'm like hitting a bunch of keys at the same time, as well as doing a time stretch on one axis and then maybe pitch on another. So it can be a useful tool that way. So this is the last one, but it's Creature recording for Creature Foley. This was also done last Monday. So that would just be one approach to making Foley sounds for a creature like that. Yeah. And I thought, since I knew what my time slot was, it would be appropriate to use food. So it's so close to lunch. So that's my talk. David Yingling, and thanks for coming. Two questions.
So how can a person get started specializing in sound design? And do you think it's important or required to have any music experience?
Music experience, if you're trying to get into sound design. It helps, but say, like, my job at Insomniac, I'm not composing any music. I mean, I'm implementing it in the game, but I'm not writing it. So that's the case for a lot of sound design jobs in the industry. But if you're talking about more of the small-scale indie games, then it can be a good asset to have. Yeah. Because it's more expected for audio people in the indie industry to do both things. Yeah.
For organizing and archiving your massive collected sound libraries, do you use a SoundMiner or an in-house version of that?
No in-house version. We used to use SoundMiner, but since we switched from Pro Tools to Nuendo has a database tool for that.
Built in?
Built in, yes. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I know you just said that you're not really on the music composition side of things, but
Just for work.
For
Yeah.
work, right?
Yeah.
For the sound design, do you have a preferred MIDI keyword, or I mean, you can answer that for composition purposes too. But does it make a difference really when you're looking at just sound design?
For sound design, you just need a MIDI controller
Right.
that can trigger the sounds for you, really. It's nice to have, you know, I think that's like a 49 key one that I have.
Yeah.
The other audio person at Insomniac, he just has, I don't know, little one, and that's all we really need. But if, you know, composing music, you have more use for having like action, key action, all these special closers. Green? Yeah.
For field recording, I know like a lot of I've seen a lot of videos and such where there's like always like a really creative thing, like the bacon being rain. But like both rain and bacon are a liquid that is splattering on something. So I was wondering if there's any like tricks to noticing what the relationships are to something that makes one sound like something else.
Any tricks?
If it's just like be creative, or if there's any like neat little ideas.
It's kind of well, I wouldn't say there's a trick, but being in the industry and working with sound so long, it's like I listen to things in a certain way, and I'm not like, oh, that's the sound of water splashing. I'm thinking of like, oh, it's what kind of frequencies are actually playing, and you know, what are the transients and what are things happening. And then I guess it's maybe because I'm thinking about work too much, I'm thinking, what else could I use it for?
Right.
But that comes with experience, and there's a lot of like sound, funny things people do with sounds, especially in movies. Like there's the Wilhelm scream. I'm sure people have heard of that.
Do you know what software would you recommend if you were like trying to compose on your own, like a full-fledged orchestral track?
Well, any of the dolls that I just showed can do that.
Just like a Wacom or?
Oh, what do you?
I mean, like, basically, if you want to like, what's something like news source be a possible one? Like, you wanted to like stimulate an orchestra?
Simulated orchestra. Well, I mean, in terms of like orchestral
Big
software
big
instruments, there's a ton out there.
Which one should you recommend though?
Nothing comes to the top of my mind, but like I haven't dealt with orchestral stuff in a long time, so sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead.
When you said, when you were showing us how the middleware can help you randomize sounds, and you showed us like 4 different clicks and 4 different like boom sounds.
Yeah.
Those, you were showing us that those were all part of the same sound, and it was randomly selecting one of each time the sound was played, right?
Oh yeah, okay, true. So that was like a case of layering within the middleware.
Right. It was randomizing each layer.
Yeah. So in that case, there was probably like 5 different things that I went through, and in each 5 categories, there was like 5 or 4 variety of the same sound. And then you play it all together. It does pick a random sound for each category.
Right.
But it is playing. If there was like 5 categories,
Sure.
it's playing 5 voices.
Right.
So you have to watch out like when you're doing that a lot. So.
Yeah. Right. Because the game engine can only handle so much.
Yeah. Or it's a limitation of the hardware or something like
Okay.
that.
Is 5 like a typical number of layers that you make for any given sounds, or just important sounds, or like just sounds that happen all the time? What's a range of layers that you might use for individual sounds you design?
It all depends on what you want to do with it. There's no hard and fast rules for that. I mean, if you are worried about how many voices you're using, say if it's like for a mobile game where it's like really important, then maybe this may not be the method that you want to use.
Right.
Back there,
Yeah, and I kind of want to follow up on what he just said. My question is about when you showed when you played the gunshot sound, I think, and I know you mentioned, or something, you had like, I think there were 8 different layers in the multi-track editor.
Yep.
And so my question for you is, are there specific layers, are there bass layers, high-pitched layers? Like if I'm doing a gunshot, let's say, do you know the layers of audio that would go on a multi-track that would be consistently in your next gunshot sound that you repeat? Do you know what I'm asking?
Yes. That's what I did there. Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, can you name them? Are there like bass,
Okay.
echo?
In that, I mean, it's not a rule either. This is just the way that I like to do that particular gun. So there was like a main body track, which is the bulk of the sound. Then there was a couple of mechanical tracks, and that's just for the ratcheting of things and the pulling of the trigger. There was a sub track just for the bass frequencies for the sound. And there was I think there was like 2 sweetener tracks. One of them was just to give that ping at the end of the shot, and the other one's for the tail end of it. And there was one more for like the sci-fi element, and I just decided to break it up for that particular sound. Yeah. Black shirt.
So in that last example, you showed a pretty long animation of 20 seconds or so, very specifically a creature doing movements and very distinct audio to that. I didn't know if that was more like in a cinematic sense or if that was like in game. And if it also have randomized, or do you usually just like take one of those like long 20-second like sound or something?
Right, so that example was pretty much just to show off like finding source for the sounds and recording it and how it can be added to an animation. So that was more like in a cinematic sense. Say if it was for gameplay, we would I would record all that source and then I would chop it up into individual pieces. Say for like if it was for that creature, like move arm fast, move arm slow, or something like that, and it would randomize, between different variety of samples, or like the footstep, it'll be like 5 variations for each little click of the footstep, and then so for in the engine, it would be that timeline editor. So you would have, it wouldn't play each animation front to back. You'd have walk forward, and it would just play one cycle of that and loop around. So you would take that walk forward animation. Each frame that would hit a footstep, you put a little flag there to play footstep sound. Or like whenever you see the leg move like this, you put a flag there to play leg move short, something like that. So it's where everything's like chopped up into individual things like that, and it's triggered through a timeline. Orange?
What food did you use for the creature's voice?
Voice? No food for that. The voice on that, I just added it to show everything together, and that was a creature voice I made for past game. Blue shirt?
Yeah.
Go ahead. What?
How did you learn to become a sound Foley artist?
Say that again?
How did you learn to become a sound Foley artist?
How did I learn?
What?
Oh, so let's see. Well, it helped. I was a musician, growing up, things like that. I got into just like making beats and things like that, so I kind of got more into the software behind all the sounds and the engineering a little bit. I thought I wanted to do music, or then I switched to like movies. So I went to Full Sail for that, the audio engineering degree. Found out quick that those industries weren't for me, so the last one was games, and I was like, I should have known that in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of a lot of modern games that you have surround sound setups, when you implement surround sound functionality, is it more on the implementation level, or do you put any of that through middleware?
The middleware does handle all the surround sound, and the game engine and the hardware, they all are running that by itself. So what we're mostly concerned is with sound sources just within a 3D space.
Sure.
The mixing between different channel types, like stereo or surround sound, is done through the middleware and through the game engine, and then eventually through the hardware. Yeah. Okay.
Hey, so I had a question specifically about the Wacom tablet and Contact.
Yep.
Did you map that through Contact? Is it a third-party mapping system that you use? Have you used it with effects streams or other soft sense or?
There's a freeware app that does the connection part. I think it's called WMIDI or something like that. I can double check that for you if you want. Read that black chick.
You're talking about you guys snatch up sample packs as soon as they're available. What company?
I can't hear you.
You're talking about you guys snatch up sample packs as soon as they're available.
Yeah.
What companies in particular do you guys like buying sample packs from?
We buy a lot of the Boom sample libraries. There's the Recordist is another one. I mean, there's a ton out there. I mean, there's plenty of companies putting them on. They all do good work. Back over there.
Yeah, I have a theory-based question about communicating through sound, and I'm wondering if you have an example of something you were proud of, like a really short sound that was made up of so many layers, and maybe you communicated something about like the creature subliminally or subconsciously through really weird source audio. Does that make sense?
There was a game we made called Edge of Nowhere. It was the first Oculus game that we made, and it's kind of like a horror thriller game. There was this creature that had no eyes, no mouth. It would kind of have like a big bulb head, neck that comes down to like spider legs, so it's a freaky creature. But when it was made aware of something, like through sound, a distraction that you made with your character, it had these like these little tendrils come out of its head, and they would flare out like this. So I had to come up with something that would communicate, oh, like you're saying, oh, what's that? So I went through a lot of iterations for that, just rattling different things. I think at one point I was in the office, I was like in the kitchen, and I like opened a bag of peanuts and I put it in an empty water bottle and I was just shaking it around. So I was just going through different things that sounded good for that. Even like having those little egg shaker things that are like $2 from the music store, and just shaking that around, adding things together, seeing what works. And what was also key for that particular sound was for it to actually really grab your attention in VR. So for it to like spatialize really well and really have the nice frequency range that really grabs the directionality of it.
Working at Insomniac, you said, what's the relationship between like the amount of creative control you have over sounds and deliver versus you like delivering sounds and having them come back and say like, no, we need it to be more this, and like how specific is that direction? How do you like to get that direction?
I have a lot of free reign to just be creative and come up with stuff on my own. A lot of it just because of the asset pipeline.
Yeah.
A lot of things are already done by the time it gets to me. So like for a character, the character art and model is already done. The animation's usually mostly all done. Even visual effects guys usually have some stuff done before it gets to me. It's just, that's the way the pipeline comes down. So a lot of that material that's already done kind of just drives the direction of the sound too. But there are other cases where I'm working off of no initial direction, right? So that's just, well, for me specifically, it's just like, that's up to me to figure it out.
Right.
Yeah. In the back there.
So, in what kind of position would you think a sound designer who's like Andy right now would or should look for in a bigger kind of bigger company? Or do you think it's more so outsourced? I know a lot of companies don't have in-house sound design musicians.
I couldn't get all of that. Can you?
So, what kind of position do you think an indie sound designer would look for in a bigger team or a bigger company? And I don't know if it's more of a personal thing, but is it in-house for you, or is it just like?
So our studio, we're all in-house sound designers. We contract out for music. That's not the case for every studio. If I was starting out in the industry, I wouldn't say go for a particular position. Just really try and get a very solid demo reel. And then, before that, work on mods or any other indie game that you can, just to build up experience beforehand. One more.
You mentioned character design, and I'm wondering, how often you work with, let's say, character designers when they're doing concept, or do they come to you like I've been saying, this is how this character should sound, and I'm wondering if you work together a lot, do you ever disagree about things, vehemently, things like that?
Not too many disagreeing going on, but like, Usually I'm working with the VFX people most of the time. When it's in those early stages, you know, it's up to the concept artists, the character modelers, the creative directors. They're usually all figuring out that, and I'm busy working on something else I need to do at the time. So at that point, I'm usually out of the loop, unless we're doing like a big brainstorming discussion before anything is started. But once the asset does get down to me, then usually I'm working with, you know, the VFX people, or maybe even the game designers if I want to like change the behavior slightly so it works better with sound. Or VFX, you know, I can, if they haven't started yet and I'm doing the sounds first, then I can like kind of work with them and be like, oh, I want to do this sound. Can we do the VFX, make them like flare up and be all fiery this way, things like that. So yeah, we do talk a lot, but usually it's, you know, at a certain point when it's kind of down the asset pipeline. Okay, I guess that's it for questions. Thank you, everybody.